Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf is a short but very complex daf on the subject of what happens when an animal set aside as a carbon Pesach is not used. What is the halacha with the animal? What are you supposed to do with it? As we've seen a number of opinions about that subject already and a number of options. The Gemara here is going to introduce some more Amarayim, and it's going to give a rule, try to compare it to a carbon chatas and what the rule is by chatas, and try to figure out which Tana each Amar specifically fits into. Now, it's complex, but if we organize the information in order, we could simplify the daf greatly. So what we've seen is as follows. We've seen so far in our last daf that a carbon pesach which is not used because it was lost and the owner used a different one instead of it. There's a machlokes Amarayim, what you do with that carbon pesach, depending on when it was lost and when it was found. The options for a carbon that was lost are as follows. If you lose a carbon and then you find it and the owner doesn't need it anymore because he already brought a different carbon instead, it could possibly be brought as a carbon anyway. Or you could have to let it graze in the field until it gets a mum, which is what's called yirad sheyistayv. You let it until it gets a mum, then you can sell it. Once it has a mum, you're allowed to sell it. Take the money and buy a different carbon and bring that on the mizbech, meaning you want to bring it as a carbon still, but you can't because there's something wrong with it. That we had seen is the option that you do when you can't bring the carbon itself because it was pushed away. It was rejected by the fact that it wasn't used. As a status of rejection, you can't put it on the mizbech, but you could exchange its kedusha to money and then from there to a different carbon and bring that. Now these are the two options in a carbon pesach. In a carbon chatas that's not used, we don't have the option of actually being makavit on the mizbech. There's no karev option. What there is the option of mesa, which is you lock it up in a room and you just let it drop dead on its own, leave it alone, it'll die shortly. Now, what is the halacha on a carbon pesach? What do you do with it? So, in a case where the carbon was lost, so it's gone, it's not really pushed away, it's not rejected. The question is, when it was found at some point, when is the fact that it's back? We have it back and it's here, and I choose not to use it anyway. When does that reject it to the point that I can no longer bring it as a carbon? A carbon pesach I can bring as a shlamim if it's not rejected, but when is it rejected to the point that I can't bring it as a shlamim anymore? I have to instead transfer its kedusha. I have to be royeh. I have to transfer its kedusha to a different animal and bring that. So we had seen a machlokes Amoraim so far. We had seen that according to Rabbah, if it's back at the time of shchita, at the time when the other animal which we used to replace it, at the time we shech that other animal, then this one is pushed away and it can no longer be karev, it has to be royeh. According to Rabbi Zera, that is only the halacha if it is back at the time of chatzos. When chatzos begins and it's fitting to be brought as a carbon and I end up never using it, then I have to transfer its kedusha to something else by being royeh. However, if it's still lost at the time of chatzos, even if it's back by the time of shchita, and it comes back sometime after chatzos, but before shchita, even if it's back at the time of shchita, that's not enough of a rejection, and therefore it could still be karev. Those are these two opinions. The Gemara now introduces a third opinion and a fourth opinion which fits in with Rabbah, so it's really a third opinion. So the one that's like Rabbah is Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says clearly the same thing as Rabbah. If it's back at the time of shchita, that's when it's rejected and you cannot be makavit. It has to be royeh. Any other time, if it's lost every other time, if it's lost all the way through the shchita, then it could be karev. But if at any time before shchita it comes back, it is rejected and it has to be royeh. Now, Shmuel says an interesting halacha. Shmuel doesn't give us a time straight out. Shmuel says, the halacha is that we compare it to a carbon chatas. A carbon chatas, anytime a carbon chatas is mesa, it can't be royeh. Again, by chatas, the options are mesa or royeh. He says, anytime a chatas is mesa, the same situation in a carbon pesach would be karev. So again, the options by pesach or royeh or karev. By chatas, it's royeh or mesa. Says Shmuel, it lines up. A chatas which is royeh, and that happens to a carbon pesach is royeh. When a chatas is mesa, a pesach is karev. It lines up perfectly. Now, the Gemara doesn't know exactly what Shmuel means. The Gemara tries a couple of options, and then the Gemara wants to see which Hana does this fit into. So the Gemara's first attempt is the simple understanding that Shmuel's not just talking about a case where an animal was lost and found. Shmuel is talking about any chatas which is mesa, and there are 5 psulim of chatas that are all halacha mishmi sinai, that they're mesa, you have to lock them in a room. And those are, besides an animal that was lost and the owner brought a different animal instead, it's also this child of a chatas, when a chatas gave birth, or a temuro, and he switched the kedusha onto something else and it ended up on both of them, or if the owner died before the korban was brought and it's not around, or if the chatas grew too old before it was actually brought. All these 5 cases, it's mesa. So the Gemara first wants to say that Shmuel is saying is halacha. All these things, when all these things happen to a chatas, it's mesa. So if all these things happen to a korban pesach, it should be karev. You could bring it. So the Gemara says that's not true, because of Rosh Hashanah, when it gets too old, the halacha is clearly that it is not karev by a korban Pesach. The Gemara quotes Rish Lakish, who brings a drasha which we saw on the daf yesterday, that we learned from Im Keves that the halachos of a shlamim that is brought from a leftover carbon are the same as regular shlamim, and in this limud he says that a Rosh Hashanah is a classic example of a carbon Pesach which is brought as a shlamim, so it is karev. According to Shmuel's rule, since it's karev by a Pesach, it should be mesa by a chatas. And the Gemara, however, brings the halacha. It says elsewhere that it's not mesa. Av Rosh Hashanah is actually roye by a chatas. So the Gemara says so it doesn't fit. The Gemara says no. Shmuel wasn't referring to any of the 4 other halachos of a korban chatas, which is mesa. He was talking about only the halacha of when it's niskapra bailim, only the halacha of when it's lost and the bailim, the owner, has brought a different carbon and then it's found. Now there are many different variables as to when it was actually found. Shmuel is saying within those cases, whenever a korban chatas is mesa, a korban pesach will be karev. When a chatas is roya, a korban pesach will be roya. Now we have to figure out what is the halacha. When is a korban chatas going to be mesa, to figure out what Shmuel holds. When is a korban pesach actually going to be karev? So the Gemara says this is a 3-way machlokes tanayim. We're going to have to analyze each of them and see where Shmuel's opinion fits in and works out. Now, one thing we know about Shmuel for sure is that he doesn't hold the same as Rabbi Yochanan, which is the same as Rabbah. He can't hold the same because Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan are quoted together as opposing shitas. So Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbah had said that the only Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbah had said that a korban Pesach, which is found at the time of Shechita, that is royeh, even if it's not found until all the way after everything else has been accomplished already. It's already after Chatzos. It's already after you separated a second carbon. You don't find it until just before Shechita, and then just at the time that you're doing the Shechita of the replacement, you already have found the carbon Pesach which was lost. At that time, that can't be carved anymore. That's going to be royeh. Now Shmuel can't hold that way. So let's talk about the Tanaim that we have in a korban chatas, and the opinion of the Rabbanan, which would be our simplest option. They hold exactly that way, and Shmuel can't hold that way because Shmuel can't hold like Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara tries in its Lishna Achrina at the end to try to say that Shmuel actually holds this way, and the Gemara there says Shmuel can't because of this reason that we said now. Shmuel can't hold like Rabbi Yochanan because he's listed as an opposing shita. Now the Rabbanan clearly say that the halacha is that even if it's only found at the time of shchita, it's already it's going to be not viable to be in a korban chatas. It'll have to be royeh, and therefore according to Shmuel, it should also have to be royeh at that time. But Shmuel, we know, like we said, doesn't hold that way because that's Rabbi Yochanan and that's Rabbah. So the question is, who exactly is, again, Shmuel holding like as far as halachos of a korban chatas, so that we can understand what he's saying as far as a korban Pesach is concerned. So the Gemara wants to say, well, maybe he's fitting to Rebbe's shita. Rebbe's shita is that a korban chatas, no matter when it's found, is always mace. If Shmuel's holding that way, he should say that a korban Pesach, no matter when it's found, should always be karev. So Gemara says maybe that's what Shmuel holds. Shmuel is saying that it's always karev. So Gemara says no, that can't be, because Shmuel probably, at least for sure, has to hold like Rabbi Zera, and that if the carbon is already found, it's already present, and it's back at the time of Chatzos, meaning it was lost before chatzos and it was found already before chatzos, Shmuel would also agree that in a situation like that, just like Rabbi Zera says that there it is nidcha and it has to be roya. But Rabbi wouldn't say that. Rabbi wouldn't say that that's called lost. So the Gemara answers, right, we said, Rabbi says that it's always mesa. So the Gemara answers that no, actually Rabbi would agree there also. Rabbi would agree, and Rabbi would say that where it is found before chatzos, that's not called lost at all, because it was never lost at the time when it was roy. It was lost before the time that it could be shachted. It was lost before chatzos. This is talking about a carbon Pesach. It was lost before chatzos. It was found already before chatzos. It wasn't. That's not even called lost. The comparative case in a carbon chatas would be that if it was lost at night, you can't be mark of a carbon chatas at night. So you had this chatas, it was set aside. It was lost at night and it was found while it was still nighttime. So there's no problem. It was never lost at the time when it was ever fitting to be shechted. The Mar quotes Rava that says it's not called lost at all. Therefore, there's no problem there. And even Rebbe would say that's not called lost. It's not called befitting. It's not called lost at the time when it's fitting to be brought. Rebbe would agree that that's not a problem, and that would also be mesa by a chatos, and therefore that could also be karev by a carbon pesach. So the Gemara says that's very nice, but the problem is then Shmuel is never really giving us any halacha when he says kol shebechatos mesa bepesach karev kol shebechatos roya bepesach roya. There isn't really both ways, because there isn't any situation in which a carbon chatas is roya because it's lost. There is no such thing. It's either mesa or it's called not lost. So what's he referring to when he tells us that a carbon pesach, when a chatas is roya, pesach is roya also? Such a case doesn't exist. So the Gemara says, okay, maybe when he says roya, he's talking about a different thing. He's not talking about it's lost. He's talking about when you initially set aside two karbanis as a chatas. So there the halacha is one you are a makriv and the other one is roya. So Shmuel means to say the same thing over there. So Gemara says that's for sure not true. When you set aside two carbon pesachs, the second one is kari for sure, definitely not roya. The way you want to say the rule here, that's not that's the case of roya by chatos. Then Shmuel is saying that's the case of roya by pesach is for sure not true. That's not the halacha. There's no shaila. Now Rashi points out the Gemara could have answered that's not lost. You told me that Shmuel was talking about lost, but the Gemara chooses not to go that way. The Gemara instead says there's the third Tana, and let's go with the third Tana. The third Tana is Rabbi Shimon. Now, Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold that there's ever any case of roya by carbon chatos. No matter who it is, where it is, what it is, it's always mesa, and therefore a carbon pesach, according to Shmuel's rule, should always be karev. So the Gemara wants to say that's what Shmuel means to say. The Gemara says, but what do you mean? Where's the part that's roya? Where's the two halves of the rule? So the Gemara says, no, Shmuel wasn't saying that there's any two halves to the rule. Shmuel is telling you, just like a carbon chatas is always mesa, no matter what, a carbon pesach is always karev no matter what. What's he teaching me? Who's he against? He's teaching you not like Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan said that if it's found all the way at the end, just before shchita, then it's roya, because it's nidche. Shmuel's telling you it's not true. It's not true. Any time that it's found, except of course if it's found before the chatzos, when it's not considered to have been lost in the first place. But any time that it's found, Shmuel says the halacha is that it is considered to be not nidche, and a carbon pesach is karev, just like a carbon chatas would be locked up in a kippah, and it would be.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.